Control your mind or it will control you. You think your mind belongs to you, but it doesn't. Not yet. What you call yourself is a fragile construction, a web of borrowed thoughts, repeated phrases, and unexamined fears passed down by those who came before you. Since childhood, the world has been whispering into your ears, molding your identity while you were too young to resist. And you grew up believing that whisper was your own voice. But if you listen closely, you'll hear something foreign in it. The tone of those who doubted you, the echo of those who feared failure, the shadow of those who surrendered before you even began. Most people never notice this. They live their entire lives following commands issued from ghosts of the past. Their ambitions, opinions, and even their sense of morality are second-hand. They speak about freedom while carrying chains in their thoughts. You can't master a mind you've never questioned. You can't find truth if the voice that guides you was built on lies you never chose. The mind is a collector. It gathers everything: approval, humiliation, expectation, and arranges it into a story called identity. Then, it guards that story as if it was sacred. But identity is not sacred when it's inherited. It's a cage painted gold. The opinions you defend most fiercely are often the ones you least understand. The fears that hold you back are not born of reason, but repetition. The world told you to doubt yourself long before you had a chance to prove otherwise. That is how control begins, silently, invisibly, through belief. The most powerful form of control is not force, it's conviction. Once the mind convinces you that its voice is truth, it no longer needs to argue. You obey it without resistance. You become both prisoner and guard, both victim and executioner. Every unchallenged thought becomes a seed of submission. You wake up thinking about what could go wrong because someone once taught you that fear equals safety. You hold your tongue because someone made you believe that silence equals peace. You hide your pain because someone convinced you that vulnerability equals weakness. Every rule inside your head has an author, and very few of them are you. That's why your life feels smaller than your potential. It's not that you lack power, it's that you've been living by borrowed logic. You've been thinking thoughts that were never yours to begin with. The mind doesn't need to shout to dominate. It only needs to sound familiar. But if you stop and observe, even for a moment, something extraordinary happens. You begin to notice a distance between the voice and the listener. You realize that the voice criticizes, judges, accuses, and fears, while something deeper simply watches. That observer is you. That awareness is your original state, the untouched, unprogrammed essence beneath the noise. It's calm, rational, patient, and unafraid. The Stoics called this the ruling faculty, the part of the soul that remains unshaken by impulse. But this faculty is buried under layers of conditioning, and most never uncover it. They live their entire lives mistaking noise for guidance, emotion for truth, reaction for will. To reclaim yourself, you must face a painful truth. Not every thought that appears in your mind deserves belief. Not every feeling deserves obedience. The mind speaks without authority until you grant it one. You've spent years bowing to its commands, feeding it with attention and calling it identity. It's time to revolt, not with rage but with observation. The moment you start watching the mind, instead of merging with it, something shifts. Its authority weakens. You realize that fear cannot think, doubt cannot reason. Only you can. The more you observe, the more the illusions crumble. What remains is simplicity, the quiet understanding that you were never broken, only conditioned. This awakening isn't pleasant. It's disorienting to realize that much of your life was a script you didn't write. But awakening is rarely comfortable. Comfort is the language of the cage. Freedom speaks in silence. And when you finally hear that silence, when you hear yourself beneath the static, you will know what true control feels like. It's not the absence of thought, but the mastery of it. It's the moment when the voice inside no longer commands, but consults. When it no longer deceives, but serves. That is when the mind becomes what it was always meant to be, a servant to the soul, not its ruler. You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. And once you remember that, the illusion ends. From that moment forward, the mind no longer leads, it follows. Here is topic 2. The addiction to reaction. You were not born reactive, you were trained to be. Somewhere along the way, your mind learned to flinch, to grab, to scroll, to reply, to defend. And the more you reacted, the more it felt like living. But reacting is not living, it's surviving. And survival is not the same as control. Control is intentional, reaction is compulsive. One builds a life, the other escapes from it. The modern world doesn't invite reflection, it demands speed. It pushes you to answer before you understand, to decide before you think, to feel before you pause. The quicker your response, the more validated you seem. You feel connected, but you're scattered. You feel alive, but you're just busy. And that's the lie that traps almost everyone. If you're reacting, then at least you're engaged. At least you're not stuck. At least you're not alone with your thoughts. But reaction is not clarity, it's noise. And noise drowns out what matters. A person addicted to reaction becomes predictable, easy to control. All it takes is a notification, a headline, a tone of voice, a silence, a delay, a trigger, and they move. Not because they chose to, but because their nervous system is wired to respond. And here's the tragedy. They call that personality. They defend their impulsiveness like it's authenticity. But there is nothing authentic about being pulled like a puppet by every emotion that passes through. That's not strength, that's exposure. A triggered mind cannot lead itself. It's hijacked by the loudest stimulus in the room. And the more it reacts, the more it forgets how to observe. Reaction replaces reflection. Urgency replaces meaning. And in this constant movement, the self dissolves. You're not thinking anymore, you're being thought. Not choosing, just echoing what the world throws at you. But there's a cost to all this noise. It fragments you. You start things and don't finish. You form opinions before understanding. You get angry before listening. You feel empty and don't know why. Because the mind cannot rest in reaction. It needs stillness to rebuild. Without pause, there is no direction, only momentum. And momentum without clarity is destruction disguised as progress. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They didn't just seek peace, they trained for it. They treated reaction as an enemy, not because emotion is bad, but because emotion without reason is fire without control. Marcus Aurelius would delay his anger. Epictetus would question his first thought. Seneca wrote letters to prepare his mind before the world could touch it. They weren't cold, they were precise. They knew the mind cannot be trusted when it's loud. That silence isn't the absence of power. It's the beginning of it. Ask yourself, what triggers you without your permission? What pattern repeats every time someone ignores you, disagrees with you, interrupts you, forgets you? That pattern is your leash. It pulls you without effort. You think you're expressing yourself, but you're just reacting to an old wound that still hasn't healed. Reaction feels powerful in the moment. It feels like movement, justice, truth. But it's just a release. And release is not freedom. Freedom is when you can feel the urge, see it clearly, and choose not to obey. That is power. Not the power to speak, but the power to stay silent. Not the power to win the argument, but to walk away. Not the power to impress, but to observe without being moved. You don't need to react to everything. Some things deserve your silence. Some emotions deserve to die in your chest. Not because they aren't real, but because they don't deserve your energy. And energy is sacred. It is your currency. If you give it to everything, you will have nothing left for what matters. The addicted mind wants conflict, it wants attention, it wants noise, and it will manufacture drama just to feed itself. Don't follow it. Don't feed it. Watch it. Starve it. And in the starvation it will quiet. In the quiet it will obey. And when it obeys, you can begin again. This time, not as a puppet, but as a commander. You were not born to react. You were born to lead. Your mind first, then your life. One must always follow the other. When thinking becomes self-harm, there is a moment when thinking stops being reflection and starts becoming harm. But you don't notice it at first, because it feels like you're just trying to understand, trying to be prepared, trying to protect yourself. So you replay what went wrong. You analyze every word. You dissect the silence. You imagine what you could have said, what you should have done, and you call that clarity. But it's not clarity. It's rumination. And rumination is not growth. It's erosion. Quiet, subtle, endless erosion of your spirit, disguised as introspection. The mind is a blade. It can cut through illusion, but turned inward, it cuts through the soul. Overthinking is not a strength. It's a slow form of self-destruction. Every time you replay that conversation, every time you try to fix the past by rehearsing it in your head, you bleed a little more. Not physically, but mentally, energetically, spiritually. You exhaust your present trying to correct a moment that no longer exists. And the mind feeds on that exhaustion. It convinces you that if you just think a little more, you'll find peace. But peace doesn't come from thinking. It comes from knowing when to stop. No enemy has hurt you more than your own imagination, the imagined judgment, the assumed rejection, the silent accusations you invent and then try to defend yourself against. You become both the attacker and the defendant, both the torturer and the wounded. You build a courtroom inside your head and live there, day after day, presenting arguments that no one hears. That is not discipline. That is madness with structure, logic without wisdom. What begins as self-awareness turns into self-surveillance. You observe your every move, every flaw, every hesitation. And instead of offering yourself mercy, you tighten the leash. You tell yourself you should know better, should be better, should do better. Not as guidance, but as punishment. You confuse pain with accountability. You call yourself weak when you're simply tired of fighting your own mind. This is the hidden form of self-harm, when the mind becomes obsessed with fixing itself by tearing itself apart. You look for every mistake. You dig into every emotion. You try to solve sadness like a puzzle. But sadness is not a problem. It's an experience. It doesn't need to be solved. It needs to be felt and released. But when your identity becomes tied to constant correction, you never stop looking for what's wrong. And so, you never feel whole. The Stoics knew this danger. They wrote not to spiral, but to anchor. Their reflections were not loops, and they were levers, tools to lift the soul out of confusion, not to bury it deeper. Seneca warned of excessive introspection that leads to anxiety, not virtue. Marcus Aurelius kept reminding himself to return to what is essential. Epictetus taught that what disturbs us is not events, but the stories we tell ourselves about them. And some of those stories become weapons. They don't guide you, they wound you. The solution isn't to stop thinking. The mind is a tool and you need it. But tools are not meant to run unsupervised. You wouldn't let a blade spin on its own. You wouldn't leave fire uncontained. The mind is the same. It needs boundaries. You must know when to think and when to rest, when to reflect and when to release, when to analyze and when to simply let the moment pass through you. There's nothing noble in constant mental suffering. There's no trophy for the one who worries the most. There's no wisdom in punishing yourself for every mistake, every flaw, every unfinished thought. Sometimes control is not pushing harder, it's letting go sooner. Your peace does not live in the answers you haven't found. It lives in the silence you've been avoiding, the silence that waits behind the noise, the silence that says, "You've thought enough, now live." You will not find yourself by endlessly examining yourself. You will find yourself when you stop identifying with the voice that's always dissatisfied, when you stop believing that every emotion needs a reason, when you accept that you are not a problem to be solved, but a life to be lived. The mind can be your sanctuary, or your execution chamber. It becomes what you allow. The mind's fear of silence. Silence terrifies the untrained mind, not because it is empty, but because it is full of everything you've been avoiding, full of truths you've buried, questions you've postponed, grief you've numbed, and desires you've disowned. That's why most people cannot bear stillness, not even for a few minutes. Because silence is not absence, it's confrontation. When the world quiets, the mind begins to speak. And for many, that voice is unbearable. So they reach for noise, for distraction, for stimulation, for anything that fills the space before the truth can echo. That's why we scroll without meaning, talk without depth, and consume without pause. Because if we stop, the weight of what we've ignored begins to rise, and the mind, sensing this, rebels. The fear of silence is not new, but today it has evolved. The modern mind is overstimulated, overinformed, overconnected, and underdeveloped. It receives more input in 1 hour than a philosopher of the past might encounter in a day. And yet, with all this information, it becomes less intelligent. Because intelligence is not about what enters the mind. It's about what you do when nothing does. True clarity arises not in reaction but in reflection, and reflection requires stillness. Stillness requires silence, and silence demands strength. But silence is misunderstood. People think it's passive, weak, boring, that nothing happens there. But that's only because they've never stayed long enough to witness it. Stay in silence long enough, and everything you need to face will come. Your doubts, your resentments, your loneliness, your unfinished grief, your real thoughts, not the rehearsed ones. And that's why the mind fights back. It tells you to get up, to check your phone, to turn on music, to fix something. It will invent urgency just to escape the mirror that silence holds. The Stoics trained for silence, not as isolation but as confrontation. Marcus Aurelius would retreat inward even in the heart of Rome. Seneca found peace in the stillness of his own room, reminding himself that noise outside is nothing compared to the noise within. Epictetus taught that silence is not about quiet surroundings, it's about an undisturbed soul. They didn't fear silence, they sharpened themselves in it, because they knew that if you cannot sit with yourself, you are not yet free. Freedom does not begin with movement. It begins with the ability to be still and not flee, to sit in a room with your own mind and not be destroyed by it. That is the test. Can you be alone and not escape? Can you face your thoughts without numbing them? Can you feel discomfort without reaching for relief? If not, you are not in control. You are under siege, and the invader is inside. Silence reveals the hierarchy of your mind. It shows you who's in charge. If you can't hold still without anxiety taking the wheel, then anxiety is your master. If you can't go 1 hour without distraction, then distraction is your drug. You cannot claim discipline if you cannot endure silence. Because silence is the furnace where true discipline is forged. But something remarkable happens when you stop fleeing. The noise begins to decay. The panic quiets. The thoughts settle. And beneath it all, you find something unexpected. Presence. Not the shallow kind sold by influencers, but the raw, lucid, unfiltered presence that belongs to you. It's not something you add. It's something you uncover when all else fades. That is the reward of silence. That is its secret. It doesn't come to entertain you. It comes to clean you. Silence is not the absence of thought. It's the removal of unnecessary thought. It's the place where the mind remembers its position, not as king, but as servant. And once that order is restored, you can begin again. Not scattered, not panicked, but clear, intentional, directed. If your mind cannot rest, it cannot rule. And if you cannot endure silence, you cannot command yourself. Because silence is not where life ends. It's where life begins to make sense. Let others run from it. Let them fill their days with sound and motion. But you must learn to sit, to breathe, to hear yourself. Because once you do, you'll realize that the thing you feared most wasn't silence. It was finally hearing the truth inside it. And once you hear it, you'll never chase noise the same way again. Comfort is a conspiracy, not of the world over you, but of your own mind keeping you small. Comfort is not your friend, it never was. It arrives dressed as relief, but it stays as limitation. It whispers promises of rest, of ease, of safety. But behind every comfort you've clung to, there is a sharp edge, one you've trained yourself not to feel. Comfort is not peace, comfort is sedation. And sedation is how the mind keeps control without you even noticing. The mind doesn't want growth. Growth means discomfort. It means risk, uncertainty, exposure. And so to maintain its illusion of safety, the mind offers you shortcuts, habits, escapes. It says, stay where it's familiar, Choose the soft path. Avoid the difficult conversation. Delay the decision. Numb the pain. Distract the longing. And each time you obey, it rewards you. Not with progress, but with silence. Not with evolution, but with stillness that decays. You were not born to stay the same. But comfort teaches you to fear the unknown more than the pain of staying small. It teaches you to tolerate quiet dissatisfaction instead of chasing loud purpose. And with each repetition, your tolerance grows. You begin to call it normal. You rationalize it as balance. You say, I'm just taking it slow, I'm giving myself grace. I don't want to burn out. But deep down you know the truth. You're not resting, you're hiding, you're not recovering, you're retreating, you're not at peace, you're sedated, just enough to not scream but not enough to feel alive. That is the conspiracy. The belief that ease is the goal, that struggle means something went wrong, that challenge should be avoided, that suffering is a sign of failure. But every soul that ever woke up, truly woke up, passed through fire first. Not as punishment, but as purification. Because a life without resistance builds nothing, and a mind that never gets challenged rules without permission. The Stoics saw comfort as the first enemy, not because they rejected joy, but because they knew joy without effort is illusion. Seneca wrote that softness breeds weakness. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that nature didn't design him for luxury, but for effort. That comfort robs a man of his edge, his hunger, his force. The Stoic doesn't seek pain, but he doesn't run from it either. He knows that growth hides behind discomfort, and that a life built only around what feels good ends up hollow. Comfort seduces you into postponing your power. It convinces you that you're not ready, not healed, not aligned, that the timing isn't right, that you should wait. But waiting becomes identity. The more you wait, the more you believe there's something you lack, and belief, when repeated, becomes reality. You begin to act small, speak soft, move slow, and the longer you stay there, the more the body forgets how to rise, the more the soul forgets what it came here to do. Comfort tells you that peace is the absence of conflict, but the Stoic knows peace is the ability to remain unshaken within conflict. That is not found in comfort. It is forged in discipline, in choosing the harder path, not to suffer but to lead the mind, to remind it that you are the master, not it. Every time you say no to comfort, you say yes to clarity. You declare that your direction matters more than your mood, that your purpose matters more than your preference. But here's what they don't tell you. Once you've trained yourself to endure discomfort, it stops being painful. The mind adjusts. It bends. What once felt unbearable now feels necessary. What once triggered fear now births momentum. That is the shift. And when it happens, comfort loses its grip. It no longer controls you because you no longer seek it. Ask yourself, what comforts are keeping you weak? What stories do you tell to justify staying where you are? What pain are you avoiding that's quietly building a prison around your potential? And what if that pain is the doorway, not the barrier? Comfort is not evil. It's just overused. It should be a reward, not a routine. A place you visit, not where you live, because if you live in comfort, you die in mediocrity. And the worst part is, you'll do it quietly, without fire, without rebellion, without ever knowing what you were capable of. But now you do. And knowing comes with a choice, taming the wild horse. The mind is a wild horse, powerful, beautiful, untamed. It can carry you through storms, across mountains, into greatness. But left alone without training, it turns violent. It throws you off course, it panics at shadows. It runs toward cliffs, and you, clinging to its back, think this chaos is just the way life is. But it's not. It's the way you've let your mind become. No one teaches you how to ride it. They just tell you to trust your thoughts, to follow your feelings, to express every emotion, to honor every impulse as truth. But the untamed mind is not honest. It's reactive. It doesn't care where you're going. It only cares about momentum. It wants to move, to act, to prove itself. And if you don't step in, it will drag you through a life of noise, of unfinished dreams, of regret disguised as freedom. There is nothing noble about letting the mind run wild. Discipline is not suppression, it's guidance. Taming is not brutality, it's precision, and until you take the reins, your power remains potential, loud, dangerous, and wasted. You see it in those who start everything and finish nothing, in those who erupt in rage then drown in guilt, in those who seek intensity because they cannot hold stillness. That is the wild horse at full speed, beautiful in motion, but directionless. They call it passion, they call it energy, but energy without form is fire in a dry forest. It doesn't build, it burns. The Stoics did not worship thought, they trained it. Marcus Aurelius questioned every instinct, not to silence himself, but to know if the thought served virtue or vanity. Seneca practiced poverty, not out of need, but to remind the mind that desire must never lead. Epictetus taught that the first thing a student must do is observe his reactions, not obey them, because obedience without awareness is slavery, even if the master is internal. Training the mind is not about perfection, it's about leadership. You don't blame the horse for being wild, you guide it. You don't shame the thought for being irrational, you challenge it, you bring it back, you repeat, over and over, until the mind learns its role, to serve the direction you choose, not to dictate it. But that training is painful, because in the beginning it feels like resistance. The mind kicks, it protests, it tells you you're being too rigid, too cold, too controlled. But that's not your conscience, that's your comfort speaking. The same voice that kept you chasing relief now fears what will happen if you stop obeying. That fear is proof you're doing something right. Because every time you pull the reins, you're teaching the mind it no longer commands the journey. This is where most people turn back. They want peace but not the work. They want clarity but not the confrontation. They want growth but not the discipline. But you cannot lead a mind you fear. You cannot calm a storm you refuse to face. And if you won't train the horse, you don't get to complain when it throws you. Start small. Begin with a single pause. A breath before the reaction. A delay before the reply. A moment between emotion and expression. That moment is not weakness. It is mastery in seed form. Each time you hold it, the horse slows. Each time you choose the path over the impulse, the wild becomes familiar. And eventually, the mind that once resisted your hand begins to respond to your presence. The goal is not to silence the mind, but to ride it with steadiness. To let it run, but only when called. To feel its power, but to guide it with reason. That's where strength lives, not in the avoidance of chaos, but in the ability to navigate it without losing your grip. A wild horse without a rider is a tragedy of wasted force, but a trained horse under a steady hand becomes unstoppable. That's your mind. That's what it can be. But only if you stop admiring its strength long enough to teach it direction. Don't wait for it to obey on its own. Don't expect it to calm down with time. The untamed mind does not age into wisdom. It only grows louder, stronger, and more destructive. Take the reins. The ritual of inner command. No one becomes sovereign by accident. Mastery is not an awakening. It is a ritual, and if you want to lead your mind instead of being led by it, you must build the habit of command. Not once. Not when you feel like it, but daily, quietly, relentlessly. That's the difference between those who drift and those who rise. One lives by emotion, the other lives by ritual. Discipline doesn't start in the battlefield. It starts in the morning. It starts in how you rise, how you breathe, how you speak to yourself before the world speaks to you, before your phone, before your cravings, before your fear has a chance to whisper. That's when the day is decided. Not by what happens, but by who you are before anything happens. The mind does not respect intention. It respects structure. You can want peace, want clarity, want power. But unless you train for it, the mind will default to its lowest rhythm. It will reach for what is easy, what is addictive, what is noisy. And without structure, you'll follow it. You won't even notice that you've become what you consume. You'll wake up in a rush, check your phone before your breath, drown in other people's voices and wonder why your own feels small. But it's not because it disappeared. It's because you stopped creating the space where it could speak. Inner command begins in solitude, not the kind that isolates you, the kind that initiates you. Time carved out not for escape, but for alignment. A ritual that reminds the mind, this is who I am, and this is what I serve. Maybe it's writing in silence. Maybe it's cold water. Maybe it's stillness with no goal. The form matters less than the intention. The ritual is not about performance. It's about remembering. Remembering that you are not here to be carried by the day. You are here to shape it. The Stoics lived by this. Marcus Aurelius prepared himself in writing. Seneca rehearsed loss in advance. Epictetus trained students to anticipate insult and discomfort before stepping into society. They didn't wait for struggle to begin acting like philosophers. Their rituals were mental armor. Their routines weren't for productivity. They were for identity. To remind the mind, every day, who the master is. You don't rise by accident. You rise by rehearsal. You train the mind like a soldier, not to destroy but to remain unmoved. You write down what matters so you don't forget it when pressure comes. You sit with your discomfort before it grows into distraction. You walk into your fears before they start directing your steps from the shadows. And every time you do this, even when you feel nothing, even when you feel numb, you reinforce the muscle of command. Because the ritual isn't about inspiration, it's about integrity. Doing what you said you would do even when the emotion has left. People want power without repetition. They want results without rhythm. But inner strength doesn't bloom in chaos. It blooms in the boring, in the unseen, in the private moments when no one claps, when no one notices. But you show up anyway. Not for reward, but because without this, you forget who you are. You don't need more motivation. You need a structure that survives your moods. Because motivation will fail you, emotion will betray you. But ritual holds. Ritual saves. It's the anchor when the mind drifts, the compass when the noise rises, the discipline that speaks when the world is too loud to think. And when you return to it daily, the mind begins to obey, not through force, but through familiarity. You stop needing to wrestle it. It shows up because you've shown up. It trusts your leadership because it has been led. That is command, not in volume but in presence, not in perfection but in consistency. You become unshaken, not because life calms down, but because you do. And the calm is not found in the world. It's built inside you, one ritual at a time. Without this, the mind will forget its place, and you will forget your power. But with it, you don't need to dominate your thoughts. You simply direct them. The price of never taking control. There is a price for everything you ignore. Every moment you silence your instincts, every decision you avoid, every truth you postpone. The mind doesn't wait for you to take control. It fills the absence with noise, with habit, with fear. And over time, the one who doesn't command himself is commanded by everything else. You think you're fine because nothing is visibly broken. But the worst damage is the one that happens quietly, internally, slowly. The kind of erosion that looks like routine, sounds like logic, feels like comfort, but is actually decay. This is the life of the man who never took the reins. He wakes up late, not just in hours, but in purpose. He checks his phone before his breath, gives away his attention before he's even spoken to himself. He does not lead his time. He reacts to it. He does not speak his mind. He protects it from judgment. He does not stand still. He fidgets through life, chasing tiny distractions that look like relief but feel like emptiness. And he tells himself, tomorrow I'll begin. But the truth is, tomorrow began years ago, and it's already repeating itself. There is a moment, usually in silence, when it hits, when he realizes that the voice inside is not wise but scared, that he has not built anything solid, only performed a version of himself that feels acceptable, that the years passed not with purpose, but in maintenance, that he was never fully here, that he never really showed up, and now he doesn't recognize himself. He sees in the mirror a collection of compromises, a man made of reactions, regrets, and rituals he never chose. This is not tragedy in the loud, dramatic sense. It's worse, it's subtle, it's invisible, it's normal. And that's why it spreads. A mind that's never commanded will settle for anything. It will follow trends, opinions, feelings, and fears. It will obey any voice louder than its own. And when a mind lives like this long enough, it forgets that it could have been free. You may think you're safe because nothing is falling apart, but sometimes collapse looks like quiet tolerance. Sometimes ruin looks like a job you don't care about, a relationship that numbs, a routine that sedates. And you call that stability. But stability without direction is just stagnation in disguise. You are not stable, you are paused. And pause without choice is paralysis. The Stoics warned of this. They didn't scream about purpose. They whispered about it every day, in letters, in meditations, in choices. They didn't wait for crisis to take control. They trained their minds before the world could claim them. Marcus Aurelius wrote not to inspire, but to remember. Seneca warned that life is not short, it's just poorly used. Epictetus said, if you don't train your will, you'll be a slave to every shadow that passes through it. They didn't speak to the mind you show the world. They spoke to the part of you that's tired of lying to yourself. And maybe that part is awake now. Maybe, just for a moment, you realize that this is it. Not tomorrow. Not next month. This breath, this pattern you're in. This way you live on autopilot and call it responsibility. This way you numb your frustration with distraction and call it peace. This way you shrink your ambition to fit your fear and call it realism. This is the price. And you've been paying it in pieces of yourself, every day, without noticing. But there's something else here too. A door, a moment, a return. Because once you see what your life becomes without command, you can choose differently. You can stop performing, stop reacting, stop obeying the false master inside. You can start asking again, feeling again, moving again, not out of desperation, but direction. You can train the mind to follow instead of lead. You can build the habits that reflect who you truly are, not who you settled into. You can become what you were always meant to be, responsible for yourself. Not because the world demanded it, but because you remembered that no one else will do it for you. No one is coming to rescue the man who gave his power away, but the one who remembers it, that man becomes dangerous again. And if this reminded you of something you had forgotten, something you're ready to reclaim, then don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe. Leave your mark in the comments. Let this be the first of many moments where you choose to respond with presence, not reaction.